They called me invisible. They thought I was just the old operational machine, easily replaceable. But what they deemed worthless 50,000 dusty paper shares from 20 years ago was exactly what transformed me into the only person who could strangle the new CEO's $150 million deal. He thought he'd erased me from the company. But he didn't know I'd been hiding a detonator in my filing cabinet for 2 decades. My name is Marissa Cole, and I've been invisible in this company for so long that sometimes I forget what it feels like to be seen. 43 years old, born and raised in the Rust Belt suburbs of Dayton, Ohio, where factory whistles used to mark time better than any clock. My father worked assembly lines until his hands couldn't grip anymore. My mother cleaned office buildings at night, including this one back when Northwell Systems was just another startup dream in a cheap commercial space. The coffee maker in the executive break room was dying again, wheezing and sputtering like it had emphysema. I'd already fixed it twice this month, but here I was at 6:30 in the morning, toolkit spread on the marble countertop, because I knew the engineers would revolt without their caffeine fix. 20 years at this company, and I still couldn't shake the habit of arriving first, fixing what was broken before anyone noticed it was breaking. Still playing maintenance worker, I see. The voice made my shoulders tense. Damian Rusk, our CEO of 6 months, stood in the doorway like he'd been posed there by a photographer. Everything about him screamed new money, trying to look like old money, the Tom Ford suit that cost more than most people's monthly mortgage, the Patek Philippe watch that he made sure caught the light when he gestured the Harvard MBA he mentioned in every third sentence. I didn't look up from the coffee maker's exposed guts. Someone has to keep things running. He laughed, that hollow sound that bounced off the break room's designer walls. That's what we have service contracts for, Marissa. Maybe focus on whatever it is you actually do here. Whatever it is you actually do here. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that hadn't quite started yet. My hands didn't pause in their work, unscrew the heating element, check the gasket, tighten the connection. But something inside me shifted. 20 years. 20 years of 16-hour days of catching mistakes before they became disasters of knowing every contract, every vendor, every employee's birthday and their kids' names. And this man who probably couldn't find the supply closet without his assistant's help didn't even know my title. Senior Vice President of Operations. Though honestly my business cards might as well have read, "The woman who keeps this place from imploding." "Coffee should work now," I said, closing the panel with a soft click. He poured himself a cup without testing it first, trusting my work even as he dismissed it, and didn't say thank you. Just turned and walked out, already scrolling through his phone, probably checking the pre-market numbers or texting his personal trainer. The break room felt colder after he left, morning light streaming through windows that overlooked a parking lot I'd watched fill and empty thousands of times. I cleaned my tools methodically, each one returning to its designated spot in the kit my father had given me when I graduated high school. "Every problem has a solution," he used to say, "long as you got the right tools and the patience to use them." The coffee maker hummed contentedly now, ready to fuel another day of innovation and disruption, and whatever other buzzwords Damian would sprinkle through his all-hands meetings. I poured myself a cup, black, no sugar, same as always, and walked to my office. Not a corner office despite my seniority. Those were reserved for people who looked good in investor presentations. My office was in the middle of the building, surrounded by the operations team I'd built from scratch. No windows, but I had something better, a clear view of everything that mattered. From my desk I could hear when the servers were running too hot, when the HVAC system was struggling, when employees were frustrated with new policies that looked good on paper but made no sense in practice. The photo on my desk showed Northwell's original team, 8 people crammed into a conference room that was really just a converted storage closet, raising coffee mugs to toast our first major contract. I was 23, fresh out of community college with an associate's degree and more determination than sense. The only woman in the photo, the only one without a computer science degree, the only one who knew how to read a commercial lease agreement. Now there were over 300 employees, satellite offices in Austin and Seattle, and talks of international expansion. The company I'd helped build from nothing was worth hundreds of millions. According to the financial press, Damien loved to court. But to him, I was just the woman who fixed the coffee maker. I pulled up the morning reports, scanning for issues before they became problems. A vendor contract expiring next month that no one else had flagged. A pattern in the help desk tickets, suggesting our Austin office had a ventilation problem. Small things, invisible things, the kind of details that kept a company running smoothly, but never made it into quarterly earnings calls. My email dinged. An all-staff message from Damien with the subject line, "Exciting changes ahead." My stomach tightened. In corporate speak, exciting changes usually meant someone was about to get screwed. But I opened it because that's what invisible people do. We pay attention. We notice things. We file away every slight, every dismissal, every moment when someone reveals exactly what they think we're worth. And sometimes, just sometimes, we turn out to be holding the one thing they never bothered to ask about. The one thing they assumed was as worthless as they believed us to be. Damien Rusk thought he knew everything about Northwell Systems. But he'd never asked about the locked filing cabinet in my office, the one that had followed me through 3 office moves. He'd never wondered why I alone among the early employees had never cashed out my equity. He'd never considered that the woman fixing the coffee maker might be the one person who could break his beautiful, ambitious plans. The email-loaded corporate logo splashed across the top, Damien's headshot smiling that practiced smile. And there it was buried in paragraph 3. Strategic merger opportunity, maximize shareholder value, streamline operations. I set down my coffee cup and walked to the filing cabinet, spinning the combination I'd memorized 20 years ago. Inside, beneath old contracts and faded photos, lay a manila envelope I'd barely looked at since 2006. 50,000 shares of original Northwell Systems stock issued when shares were just paper and promises worth less than the certificate they were printed on. Damien was about to learn what happened when you dismissed the person who'd been keeping the lights on for 2 decades. When you assumed that invisible meant powerless. When you forgot to ask what the woman fixing the coffee maker might be holding in reserve. The memories always hit hardest when I walked past the old building on Maple Street. Even now, 20 years later, I could still smell the mildew from that first office, really just 3 rooms above a Vietnamese restaurant, the kind of space you rented when your business plan was more prayer than strategy. Northwell Systems started there in 2004, though. Started was a generous term for what we were doing in those early days. I was 23, fresh out of Sinclair Community College, with an associate's degree in business administration, and a resume that consisted mostly of retail jobs and 1 internship at a law firm, where I'd learned to read contracts out of sheer boredom. The founder, Marcus Northwell, hired me because I was the only candidate who showed up to the interview with a spreadsheet detailing how much money the company was hemorrhaging on their current lease agreement. "You always count pennies like that?" he'd asked, amused. "When you grow up counting them to buy milk, yeah, you do." I'd answered too young to know you weren't supposed to mention poverty in job interviews. He hired me on the spot. Office manager, he called it, though the title was laughable, considering I was managing 3 programmers who lived on energy drinks and considered showering optional. My desk was a door balanced on sawhorses. The bathroom doubled as our server room because it was the only space with decent ventilation. When it rained, we had to move all the computers away from the windows that leaked. But God, we were hungry. Hungry in that way only people who've been told no their whole lives can be. The programmers' kids? Really, most of them dropouts like Marcus coded 18-hour days sleeping under their desks. I handled everything else. Contracts with suppliers, negotiations with the landlord, making sure we had toilet paper and coffee, and the occasional vegetable to prevent scurvy. I learned accounting from YouTube videos and library books, staying up until 3 in the morning to understand depreciation schedules and tax codes. When we couldn't afford a real HR person, I taught myself employment law, creating policies from templates I'd cobbled together from bigger companies' handbooks. When the ancient air conditioner died in the middle of July, I took apart my own window unit from home and Frankensteined a solution that kept the servers from melting. The first payroll almost broke us. We had exactly $4,327 in the bank and payroll was $4,800. I'll never forget standing in Marcus's office, really just a corner sectioned off with a shower curtain showing him the numbers. We could ask everyone to wait a week, he suggested, but we both knew that wasn't really an option. These kids were living on ramen as it was. So I did what I'd watched my mother do 100 times. I got creative. Called our biggest client, sweet-talked them into paying their invoice early, negotiated a payment plan with our internet provider, sold my car a beat-up Honda that barely ran anyway, and took the bus for the next 6 months. We made payroll with $17 to spare. That's how it went month after month. While the programmers built beautiful code, I built the invisible infrastructure that kept us alive. Purchase orders, vendor relationships, lease negotiations, insurance policies, all the boring stuff that nobody noticed until it went wrong. The breakthrough came during the holiday season of 2005. We'd landed a contract with a regional bank, our biggest yet, and suddenly we had real money coming in. Not Fortune 500 money, but enough to move to a real office, hire actual employees, maybe even get health insurance. The team celebrated at a dive bar near the old office, everyone giddy with the possibility that we might actually make it. Marcus bought round after round, making increasingly elaborate toasts. Around midnight, when everyone was properly drunk on cheap beer and cheaper dreams, he pulled me aside. "I want to do something," he said, words slightly slurred. "For you. The guys, they've got their equity packages, but you saved us. More than once." I laughed it off. "That's what you pay me for." "No." He insisted, serious in that way drunk people get when they think they're having profound moments. "You're not just an employee. You're a founder. You should have equity." The next morning, hungover and sheepish, he might have forgotten the whole thing. But I didn't let him. I showed up with incorporation documents I'd pulled from the state website, explained how we could issue shares, what it would mean for the cap table. Always better to strike when the gratitude was fresh. That's how I ended up with 50,000 shares of Northwell Systems stock issued on December 15, 2005, when the company was worth approximately nothing, and our biggest asset was a server held together with duct tape and hope. "This is kind of weird," Marcus had said, signing the papers. "Like, what do we even put for the value?" "Doesn't matter," I'd told him. "Either they'll be worth nothing forever, or someday they'll be worth something. Either way, it's just paper for now." Just paper. I remember holding that stock certificate. We'd printed it on the good printer at Kinko's, trying to make it look official, and thinking it was like holding a lottery ticket for a drawing that might never happen. But I held on to it anyway. Through the growth years when programmers cashed out their options to buy houses and Teslas. Through the first acquisition offers when Marcus sold his stake for enough to retire at 35. Through 2 recessions, 3 CEOs, and countless pivots that were really just expensive ways of saying we had no idea what we were doing. Other early employees sold when the stock hit $10, then 50, then 100. They bought houses, started their own companies, moved to Costa Rica to find themselves. But I held on partly out of stubbornness, partly because I'd learned from my parents that you don't sell the cow when you're still getting milk. And partly because those shares were more than money to me. They were proof. Proof that I'd been there when there was just a leaky office above a restaurant. Proof that someone had once looked at me, a community college graduate with no connections, no trust fund, no safety net, and seen a founder. Now sitting in my windowless office listening to Damian Rusk's voice echo through the hallways as he pitched his grand vision to investors, I pulled out that certificate again. The paper had yellowed with age, the edges soft from handling. 50,000 shares of common stock, it read in officious lettering. According to the last valuation, each share was worth approximately $3.12. Not nothing, but not life-changing either. Certainly not enough to matter in a $150 million merger. Or so everyone assumed. But assumptions were dangerous things in business. They made you overlook the fine print. Made you ignore the woman who'd been reading contracts since she was 23. Made you forget to ask about the terms attached to those 50,000 pieces of just paper. I smoothed out the certificate, running my fingers over the corporate seal we designed in Microsoft Paint all those years ago. Marcus had wanted it to look like something from the 19th century, all elaborate scrollwork and Latin phrases nobody understood. Hidden in all that decoration was a clause I'd insisted on copied from some Fortune 500 company's bylaws I'd found in the library. Something about minority shareholder rights and protective provisions. Marcus had laughed, asked why we needed all that legal mumbo-jumbo for a company that could barely afford coffee. Insurance, I'd told him. You get it when you don't need it, so you have it when you do. 20 years later, I was about to find out if that insurance was still valid. If the invisible woman with her worthless paper shares might have more power than anyone imagined. The coffee maker in the break room hummed steadily, working perfectly now. But fixing broken things was easy when you had the right tools. Sometimes the right tool was a screwdriver. Sometimes it was patience. And sometimes, just sometimes, it was a piece of paper everyone had forgotten existed. The first time Damien Rusk stole from me, I almost didn't notice. It was subtle the way a pickpocket works so smooth, you don't feel your wallet leaving until you reach for it later. We were in the quarterly planning meeting, the one where department heads presented their strategies for the next fiscal period. I'd spent 3 weeks preparing a comprehensive overhaul of our vendor management system, complete with projected savings of $2.3 million annually. Interesting approach, Damien had said when I finished, his tone suggesting it was anything but interesting. Let's table this for now and move on. 2 weeks later at the all-hands meeting, he presented my exact plan as his CEO initiative for operational excellence. My slides, my numbers, my implementation timeline, all with his name attached. The only change he'd made was upgrading the font to something more executive. Sandra from procurement caught my eye across the room, her expression asking if I was going to say something. I gave her the tiniest shake of my head. 20 years in corporate America teaches you that some battles aren't worth fighting. Not yet. But I started keeping records, screenshots, emails, timestamps. The habits you develop growing up poor, saving every receipt, documenting every transaction, they serve you well when you need to prove a pattern. The second theft was bolder. The Singapore expansion plan I'd been developing for months, researching tax implications and regulatory requirements on my own time. I'd mentioned it briefly in a directors' meeting, just testing the waters. The next week, Damien announced he'd been personally exploring Southeast Asian markets and would be leading a task force to investigate opportunities. I'll need someone to handle the grunt work, he said, looking around the conference table like he was choosing which intern to burden. His eyes landed on me. Marissa, you're good with paperwork. Can you pull together some basic research? Good with paperwork. I'd been running operations since before he'd finished his undergraduate degree, but to him, I was good with paperwork. Of course, I said, my voice steady as water. The pattern became predictable after that. I'd surface an idea, Damien would dismiss it, then resurrect it as his own revelation. The wellness program that reduced our health insurance costs by 15%, his progressive leadership. The partnership with local technical colleges that solved our hiring pipeline issues, his innovative talent strategy. But it wasn't just the theft that wore me down. It was the casual erasure, the way he systematically wrote me out of Northwell's story. When reporters came to profile our unicorn trajectory, Damien would walk them through the company history, somehow skipping the years between startup and success. In his version, Marcus had the vision, the programmers built the product, and then through some immaculate conception, a fully formed corporation emerged. No mention of who negotiated the lease when we couldn't afford lawyers. Who figured out the tax structure that saved us $600,000 in the early years. Who convinced vendors to extend credit when our bank account was emptier than a politician's promises. The company newsletter ran a feature on Northwell's evolution, complete with a timeline graphic. I wasn't in a single photo. Not the groundbreaking ceremony for our first real office. Not the launch party for version 2.0. Not even the holiday parties I'd organized for 15 years running. It was like I'd been digitally erased, a ghost haunting my own history. You should say something. Keisha from HR told me one afternoon, finding me in the supply closet doing inventory because I needed to count something I could control. This isn't right. What would I say? I asked, checking off boxes of printer paper. That the CEO is mean to me, that he doesn't give me credit. I'll sound like a child complaining about not getting picked for dodgeball. You'll sound like someone who's being systematically marginalized, she corrected. But Keisha was 32, still believed in things like fairness and proper procedures. She hadn't learned yet that HR exists to protect the company, not the employees. That a 43-year-old woman complaining about recognition was just asking to be labeled difficult and managed out. So I stayed quiet, stayed invisible, stayed useful, fixed the coffee maker and the HVAC system, and the 1,000 other things that broke daily. Let Damien take credit for my ideas, while I took satisfaction in knowing the truth, even if no one else did. The breaking point came on a Tuesday that felt like any other Tuesday until it wasn't. I was reviewing contracts when my email dinged. A message to the executive team, which I was still technically part of, though Damien often forgot to include me. Team, I want to introduce you to Bradley Morrison, who'll be joining us as Chief Operating Officer, reporting directly to me. Bradley comes to us from McKinsey with an impressive track record of optimizing operations at scale. He'll be taking point on all operational initiatives moving forward. Please join me in welcoming him to the Northwell family. Chief Operating Officer, the role I'd been doing without the title for 2 decades. I read it 3 times, waiting for the part where it explained how this would affect my position. There wasn't one. I was being erased again, but this time it wasn't just from photos or credit. This was erasure from the org chart itself. My phone buzzed. Sandra texting, "Are you seeing this shit?" Then Keisha, "My office, now." Then 3 others, all variations of shock and outrage on my behalf. But I didn't go to Keisha's office. I didn't answer the texts. I sat in my windowless room surrounded by 20 years of keeping this place running and felt something I hadn't felt since those early days above the Vietnamese restaurant. Hunger. Not for food or recognition or even revenge. Hunger for the truth to matter. For the invisible work to be seen. For anyone to acknowledge that Northwell Systems existed because someone had been here every day, making sure the lights stayed on. I opened the filing cabinet again, pulled out the manila envelope. The stock certificate felt heavier than paper should feel, like it had absorbed all the years of being overlooked, undervalued, and underestimated. Damien thought he was smart bringing in his McKinsey buddy to do the job I'd been doing since before McKinsey recruited him from business school. He thought he could erase me completely, reduce me to a footnote in Northwell's history of that. But he'd made one crucial mistake, the kind of mistake people make when they assume the person fixing the coffee maker couldn't possibly understand complex financial instruments. He'd never asked about my shares. Never wondered why I hadn't sold during any of the liquidity events. Never bothered to check what rights came attached to those 50,000 pieces of paper. In his mind, I was just the help. And the help didn't own meaningful equity. The help didn't have voting rights. The help certainly didn't have obscure protective provisions that could derail a $150 million merger. I smoothed out the certificate one more time, then placed it carefully back in the envelope. Damien Rusk was about to learn why you should always read the fine print. Why you should never underestimate someone who's been keeping records for 20 years. Why you should never ever assume that invisible means powerless. The email dinged again. Another all-staff announcement. This one with the subject line that made my hunger sharpen into something with teeth. Exciting news, Northwell Systems enters merger discussions. I smiled for the first time in 6 months. Not the polite smile I wore in meetings, or the tired smile I gave the security guard every morning. This was the smile my mother used to wear when she'd figured out how to make $20 feed us for a week. The smile of someone who'd just realized they were holding all the cards in a game everyone else thought was already over. Bradley Morrison could have the COO title. Damien could have his merger dreams and his McKinsey consultants and his executive bathroom key. But I had something better. I had leverage. And unlike ideas or credit or recognition, leverage was something they couldn't steal. The internal announcement hit our inboxes at exactly 9:37 on a Wednesday morning. I know the precise time because I'd been watching my email like a hawk for 3 days ever since Damien's assistant had accidentally left a merger document on the printer, the one I'd fixed last Tuesday naturally. Subject: Northwell Systems announces strategic partnership with Apex Digital Holdings. Dear team, I'm thrilled to announce that Northwell Systems has entered into exclusive negotiations with Apex Digital Holdings for a strategic merger valued at $150 million. This transformative partnership will position us as a leader in enterprise software solutions and create unprecedented opportunities for growth. As we move through this exciting transition, some organizational restructuring will be necessary to align with Apex's operational excellence standards. Rest assured, we are committed to transparency throughout this process. More details to come in Friday's all-hands meeting. Onward and upward. Damien Rusk, Chief Executive Officer. I read it twice, parsing the corporate doublespeak I'd learned to decode over 20 years. Strategic partnership meant acquisition. Organizational restructuring meant layoffs. Operational excellence standards meant they'd gut us like a fish and sell the parts. My phone started buzzing immediately. The operations team group chat exploded with speculation and panic. But I stayed silent, reading the attachment, a high-level overview that was anything but high-level if you knew where to look. There it was, buried on page 7, section 4.3.2, Redundancy Elimination in Administrative Functions. A neat little chart showing which positions would be optimized. My role wasn't even listed. Not eliminated, not retained, just absent, like I'd never existed at all. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of whispered conversations and worried faces. People kept stopping by my office looking for reassurance I couldn't give. The coffee maker broke again on Thursday afternoon, but I left it broken. Let Damien figure out who to call when the service contract he'd bragged about turned out to be a figment of his imagination. Friday's all-hands meeting was held in the main conference room, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows that made everything feel exposed. Damien stood at the front, like a televangelist, Bradley Morrison flanking him like a bodyguard in a Brooks Brothers suit. "This is our moment," Damien intoned, clicking through slides that looked like they'd been designed by someone who'd just discovered PowerPoint animations. Apex Digital Holdings isn't just acquiring Northwell Systems. They're investing in our vision, our innovation, our future. The room was silent except for the hum of the overhead projectors. 200 faces trying to calculate their survival odds. "Now I know change can be scary," he continued, his voice taking on that false warmth executives learn in media training. "But I want to assure you all that Apex values talent. The best and brightest of Northwell will absolutely have a place in our new structure." Someone raised a hand. "What about severance packages?" "Great question," Damien said, like he'd been hoping someone would ask. "Those who are affected by the transition will receive generous packages. We're talking 2 weeks per year of service, full benefits extension, the works." 2 weeks per year. I did the math automatically. 40 weeks of pay to disappear quietly. To sign whatever non-disclosure agreement they put in front of me. To pretend the last 20 years had been nothing more than an extended temp assignment. "Any other questions?" Damien scanned the room, his eyes sliding over me like I was furniture. I raised my hand. He hesitated just for a second, then pointed at me with the enthusiasm of someone acknowledging a waiter. "Yes. What about shareholder approval?" The room got quieter, if that was possible. Damien's smile flickered like a bulb about to burn out. "I'm sorry." "The merger," I said, standing up so everyone could see me. "What about shareholder approval? Don't we need a vote?" Bradley whispered something urgently in Damien's ear. The CEO's face cycled through several expressions before settling on patronizing patience. "That's a technical detail that doesn't really concern." "I'm a shareholder," I interrupted, "so it concerns me." Someone in the back actually gasped. In 20 years, I'd never interrupted a CEO, never stood up in an all-hands meeting, never been anything but helpful, reliable, invisible Marissa. "Well," Damien said, recovering his composure, "minority shareholders will of course be notified through proper channels, But with the board's unanimous approval and majority stakeholder consent, the merger will proceed as planned. What percentage constitutes majority? I asked. More whispering between Damien and Bradley. The CFO was frantically typing on his laptop. That's really getting into the weeds, Damien said. Perhaps we could discuss your concerns privately. It's a simple question, I pressed. What percentage of shares need to approve the merger? The CFO looked up from his screen, his face pale. He showed it to Bradley, who showed it to Damien, who suddenly looked like he'd swallowed something sharp. 66.7%, he said quietly. And current institutional and board ownership is… Silence. Mr. Rusk, I prompted, what percentage of shares do the institutional investors and board members control? Approximately 64%, the CFO answered when it became clear Damien had lost the ability to speak. I let that number hang in the air for a moment, watching understanding dawn on faces around the room. So you need another 2.7%, I said. Minimum. Damien's recovery was almost impressive. As I said, we're confident all shareholders will see the value in this merger. Now let's move on to integration planning. I sat back down, having planted the seed I needed to plant. Let him finish his presentation, pretend everything was still on track. But I caught the looks between him and Bradley, saw the CFO furiously texting someone, probably legal. The meeting ended with forced enthusiasm and scattered applause. People filed out, murmuring, the energy completely different from when they'd entered. I stayed seated, pretending to review my notes, waiting. Sure enough, Damien appeared at my elbow within minutes, Bradley hovering behind him like a storm cloud. Marissa, he said, his voice low and controlled. My office, now. I gathered my things slowly, deliberately. Actually, I have a vendor call scheduled. How about Monday? This can't wait until Monday. Then I suggest you ask more nicely, I said, looking him directly in the eye for the first time since he'd arrived at Northwell. His jaw clenched. Bradley started to step forward, but Damien held up a hand. Would you please join us in my office to discuss your concerns about the merger? The words came out like he was chewing glass. Of course, I said pleasantly. Right after my vendor call. Should be done by 3. I walked out before either of them could respond, leaving them standing in the empty conference room, like actors who'd forgotten their lines. My phone was buzzing before I reached my office. Emails marked urgent, flooding in from legal, from HR, from numbers I didn't recognize. I ignored them all, closed my door, and pulled out the yellow legal pad I'd been making notes on for 3 days. At the top of the page, in my careful handwriting, Original Northwell Systems Shareholder Agreement Section 7.4 Protective Provisions. Below that, 20 years' worth of leverage spelled out in language that predated Damien Rusk's MBA by a decade. They wanted me to disappear, fine. But it was going to cost them more than 40 weeks of severance. It was going to cost them everything. The coffee maker in the break room stayed broken all day. Nobody knew how to fix it except me, and I was busy preparing for the most important meeting of my career. The one where Damien Rusk would finally learn my worth. 50,000 shares might not sound like much in a $150 million deal. But 2.7%, that was enough to stop everything. The summons came at 3:15, delivered not by email, but by Damien's assistant in person, her heels clicking against the linoleum like a countdown timer. She looked uncomfortable, probably because she'd never been to the operations wing before. We didn't have marble floors down here. Mr. Rusk would like to see you now, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. Tell him I'll be there in 10 minutes, I replied, not looking up from my screen. He said immediately. I finally raised my head, giving her the kind of smile that had gotten me through 20 years of corporate condescension. Then he should have asked nicely the first time. She left without another word. I gave it exactly 10 minutes, then made my way to the executive floor, taking the stairs instead of the elevator. Small rebellions, but they mattered. Damien's office was everything mine wasn't: corner position walls of glass designer furniture that cost more than most people's cars. He sat behind his aircraft carrier of a desk, Bradley Morrison positioned to his right, like a lieutenant. The head of HR, Patricia Nguyen, sat to his left, her face carefully neutral. Legal had sent their senior counsel, Jonathan Wright, who I recognized from the parking lot, but had never actually spoken to in 15 years. "Please sit," Damien said, gesturing to the single chair positioned in front of his desk. The power dynamics weren't subtle, 4 of them, 1 of me, their height advantage emphasized by the seating arrangement. I sat, placing my legal pad on my lap, keeping my hands steady. "We need to discuss your shares," Damien began without preamble. "All right." He waited, probably expecting me to fill the silence with nervous chatter. When I didn't, he continued. "We've reviewed the shareholder registry. You appear to own 50,000 shares of common stock." "That's correct." "Shares that frankly we weren't aware existed in that quantity." I tilted my head slightly. "That sounds like a due diligence problem." Jonathan Wright leaned forward. "Ms. Cole, these shares, they appear to have some unusual provisions attached." "Not unusual," I corrected, "just old, from when the company was incorporated properly in 2005. "Regardless," Damien interjected, "we need to ensure all shareholders are aligned with the merger. It's in everyone's best interest." "Everyone?" I asked. "Or just yours?" His jaw tightened. "The merger represents a significant premium for all shareholders. Your shares alone would be worth approximately $156,000. "Actually," I said, flipping open my legal pad, "at $3.12 per share, they're worth exactly $156,000. No approximately about it." "Even better," he said, forcing enthusiasm. "That's a substantial sum." "It is," I agreed. "Almost $4,000 for every year I've been here. Minus taxes, of course. So really, more like $2,700 per year. Or about $7.39 per day." The room was silent. Patricia shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "The point is," Bradley spoke for the first time, his voice carrying that McKinsey confidence, "you stand to benefit significantly from this merger." "As opposed to what?" I asked, keeping my job. "Your position," Damien started, then seemed to think better of it. "Look, Marissa, let's be frank. The operational redundancies are necessary for the merged entity to achieve optimal efficiency." "You mean I'm being fired?" "Transitioned," Patricia corrected quickly, "with a very generous package. 2 weeks per year," I said, 40 weeks total, plus the share payout. So all in about $300,000 for 20 years of building this company." "Building is a strong word," Bradley muttered. I turned to look at him directly. "What would you call it when someone handles every contract, vendor relationship, HR policy, and facilities issue, while the company grows from 3 people to 300 maintenance?" Damien held up a hand. "Let's not rehash the past. We're here to discuss the future. Your future specifically." He slid a folder across the desk. "This is the separation agreement. Very standard. You'll see the package we discussed plus continuation of benefits references, the usual." I didn't touch the folder. "What about my shares?" "Page 7, Jonathan Wright said. "You'll need to sign a waiver of your shareholder rights to receive the severance package." There it was. The trap they thought they'd set so cleverly. Sign away my rights for the severance, or keep my rights and get nothing when they eliminated my position anyway. And if I don't sign? Damien's practiced warmth finally cracked. "Then you'll be terminated for redundancy with the standard 2 weeks' notice. No enhanced package, no benefits continuation, and your shares will be worth exactly what the market says they're worth, which without the merger premium is substantially less." "How much less?" "Current trading price is around $1.70, the lawyer supplied. So about $85,000 total." "That's quite a difference," I said mildly, "almost like you're trying to buy my cooperation." "We're trying to be fair," Damien said through gritted teeth. Fair. I tasted the word like wine that had turned. Like when you presented my vendor management system as your idea, or when you took credit for the Singapore expansion plan. Was that fair? Patricia's eyes widened. Bradley shifted in his seat. But Damien just smiled, that cold shark smile I'd seen him use on competitors. "I don't know what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything." I cut him off. "I'm stating facts. just like the fact that according to the original shareholder agreement, any merger or acquisition requires approval from holders of 66.7% of outstanding shares. You have 64%.
We're aware, he said tightly.
Are you also aware of Section 7, subsection 4? Jonathan Wright's fingers flew over his laptop keyboard. His face went pale as he read. What's Section 7, subsection 4? Patricia asked. I smiled the same smile I'd given Damien's assistant earlier. Protective provisions for minority shareholders, specifically if any shareholder who has held their shares continuously since incorporation objects to a merger. The approval threshold increases to 75%. The room went absolutely still. That can't be right, Bradley said. Page 12 of the original incorporation documents, I said helpfully. I should know. I typed them. Jonathan Wright looked up from his screen, his face ashen.
She's right. It's there.
That's ancient, Damien sputtered. No modern company has provisions like that. No, I agreed. But we weren't a modern company in 2005. We were 3 guys and a girl above a Vietnamese restaurant trying to make sure nobody got screwed if things went south, or north as it turned out. This is ridiculous. Damien stood up, pacing to the window. One person can't block a $150 million deal. Actually, I said that's exactly what protective provisions are designed to do. Protect minority shareholders from being steamrolled by majority interests. You're not being steamrolled, he snapped. You're being offered a fortune for shares in a company you contributed nothing to building. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Patricia actually winced. I stood up slowly, gathering my legal pad. Contributed nothing. I see. Well, then this should be easy for you to handle without me. Sit down, Damien commanded. We're not done.
Yes, I said quietly. We are. You've made your offer. I need time to consider it.
How much time? Jonathan asked. Oh, I don't know. How long does it take to value 20 years of invisible work, 20 years of keeping this place running while people like him? I nodded at Damien, took credit for everything that worked and blamed others for everything that didn't. I moved toward the door, then paused. By the way, the coffee maker's still broken. The service contract you mentioned, it expired 3 months ago. I've been handling repairs myself to save money. You might want to figure out who's going to do that now.
Is that a threat? Bradley asked.
No, I said, my hand on the door handle. That's operational intelligence, the kind that's apparently worth nothing. I left them sitting there, 4 executives in a glass office, finally starting to understand that they'd cornered someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The folder with the separation agreement remained on Damien's desk, untouched and unsigned. Just like my shares had remained in that filing cabinet waiting for exactly this moment. They'd offered me $7.39 per day for 20 years of work. Now they were about to learn what my time was really worth. The steel box had lived in my bedroom closet for 2 decades behind winter coats I never wore and shoes that had gone out of style. It was the kind of lockbox you bought at Office Depot for $39.99, nothing fancy, just functional. Like me, I suppose. I brought it to the kitchen table, spinning the combination I'd never forgotten, 1505. The date Marcus had signed those shares over to me, drunk on cheap beer, and the possibility that we might actually build something that mattered. Inside time had stopped. Everything exactly as I'd left it. The original stock certificate creased from that one time I'd shown it to my mother. The incorporation documents typed on an actual typewriter because we couldn't afford a good printer. Board meeting minutes from when the board was just Marcus, me, and a lawyer who'd agreed to work for equity. But it was the 3rd document that mattered now. 4 pages stapled together with shareholders' agreement, typed across the top in capitals that tried too hard to look official. I spread it on the table, running my finger down to Section 7. The lawyer, what was his name, Davison, had insisted on this section. Protective provisions, he'd called them. Just in case.
In case of what? Marcus had asked.
In case you succeed, the lawyer had said. Success brings vultures. 20 years later, the vultures had names like Damien Rusk and Bradley Morrison. My phone had been silent for exactly 3 hours when the first text came through. Not from Damien, he was too smart for that. From Patricia in HR. Hi, Marissa. Could we schedule a follow-up conversation? I think there might be some misunderstandings we could clear up. I didn't respond. 20 minutes later, another text. Jonathan Wright this time. Ms. Cole, I'd like to discuss the shareholder provisions in more detail. Could we meet for coffee? Coffee. As if this was some casual chat between colleagues. By 6 in the evening, I had 17 missed calls, 43 emails, and a dozen text messages. The invisible woman had suddenly become very visible indeed. I made myself dinner a proper meal for once, not the frozen something I usually grabbed between fixing other people's problems. Grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, a glass of wine from a bottle that cost more than $12. If they wanted to negotiate, they could wait while I remembered what it felt like to matter. The doorbell rang at 8:45. Through the peephole, I saw Patricia Nguyen standing on my front porch, looking deeply uncomfortable in her designer suit and heels that were definitely not made for walking up driveways. I considered not answering, but Patricia had always been decent to me, one of the few executives who actually said good morning in the elevator. This is highly irregular, I said, opening the door but not inviting her in. I know, I'm sorry, but Damien insisted I try to reach you tonight. And you always do what Damien insists. She had the grace to look ashamed. May I come in just for a few minutes? I stepped aside, leading her to the living room, but not offering coffee or water. The social contract of hospitality didn't apply to ambushes. Patricia perched on the edge of my couch, like she might need to flee at any moment. Marissa, I want you to know that I've always respected what you do for Northwell. What I did? I corrected. Past tense according to your org charts. That's actually what I wanted to discuss. What if it didn't have to be past tense? I laughed, surprising both of us. Are you seriously offering me my job back? The job I've been doing for 20 years? How generous. Not your current position, she said quickly. Something better. A consulting role with the new organization. 6-month contract, good pay, help with the transition. And in exchange, your cooperation with the merger. My signature on the waiver, you mean? She nodded, not even trying to dress it up. What's the consulting rate? I asked, curious how much they thought my cooperation was worth. $500 per hour, full-time for 6 months. I did the math. About $200,000. Added to the severance and share payout, they were now offering $500,000 to make me go away quietly. That's a lot of money, I said. You deserve it, Patricia said, leaning forward. Marissa, I know Damien can be difficult, but this merger is happening. Apex has already started due diligence. Announcements have been made. If it falls through now, the damage to Northwell would be catastrophic. And whose fault would that be? Does fault matter if everyone loses? I stood up, walked to the window. My neighbor's kids were playing basketball in their driveway, the floodlight casting long shadows on the concrete. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that corporate wars were being fought in living rooms 3 houses down. Do you know what I did yesterday? I asked, not turning around. No. I fixed the printer in accounting, the big one that always jams. Took me 40 minutes because the paper feed mechanism was completely misaligned. Nobody asked me to. It's not my job, hasn't been for years technically. But I fixed it because I knew accounting had month-end reports due, and that printer breaking would cascade into delays that would ripple through 5 departments. I don't understand. That's the point. I turned to face her. None of you understand. You see operations as overhead administrative burden, the unsexy stuff that just happens. But nothing just happens. Someone makes it happen. Someone who knows that the HVAC system on the 3rd floor runs 4 degrees warmer than the 2nd, so you have to adjust the zones differently. Someone who remembers that the loading dock gate sticks when it rains, so you have to schedule deliveries accordingly. Someone who's been here long enough to know where all the bodies are buried. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Is that a threat? God, no, I said, exhausted suddenly. It's just the truth. I know this place, really know it in ways that can't be transferred in a 6-month consulting contract. But Damien's made it clear that knowledge has no value to him.
So help us understand its value, Patricia urged. Name your price.
My price. I sat back down, meeting her eyes directly. I want what Marcus promised me 20 years ago. Not money ownership, real ownership. A seat at the table where decisions get made. A voice that gets heard, not stolen. The merger terms are already set. Then change them. We can't just...
You can't, I interrupted. Or Damien won't. She didn't answer, which was answer enough.
Here's what I know, I said, pulling the shareholders' agreement from the side table where I'd left it. Section 7, subsection 4 gives me the power to block this merger. Not because I own a lot of shares, I don't. But because I've held them continuously since incorporation. Because Marcus and that lawyer were smart enough to protect people like me from people like Damien. People like you, the ones who do the work while others take the credit. The ones who build the foundation while others decorate the penthouse. The invisible ones until suddenly we're not. Patricia stood to leave, then hesitated. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. About all of it. The way you've been treated, the position we're putting you in now. You deserved better.
Yes, I agreed. I did.
After she left, I sat in the dark for a long time, holding the shareholder agreement like a talisman. Outside, the basketball game had ended, porch lights clicking off one by one as the neighborhood settled into sleep. My phone buzzed. Another text from Damien. This doesn't have to be adversarial. Let's find a solution that works for everyone.
Everyone. That word again. As if I'd ever been included in his definition of everyone.
I typed back my first response of the day. I'll be in the office Monday morning. We can discuss it then. Let him stew on that for the weekend. Let him wonder what I was planning, what leverage I might be gathering. Let him feel for just a few days what it was like to be at someone else's mercy. The steel box sat open on my kitchen table, documents that had seemed worthless for so long now worth more than I'd ever imagined. Not in dollars, though the dollars mattered, but in power. The power to finally, after 20 years, make them see me. The coffee maker in the office was still broken. Come Monday, it would be someone else's problem to solve. But this was my problem. And after 20 years of solving everyone else's, I was ready to solve my own. The weekend stretched like a siege, with Damien's forces marshalling their arguments while I fortified my position. By Saturday afternoon, the emails had evolved from professional to desperate. Legal sent 3 different interpretations of the shareholder agreement, each more creative than the last. Bradley Morrison tried calling from what must have been his golf club background noise of entitled laughter bleeding through. Even board members I'd never spoken to suddenly discovered my phone number. I ignored them all. Instead, I did what I'd always done when overwhelmed. I organized. Pulled 20 years of documentation from boxes in my garage, creating a paper trail that told a different story than the one Damien had been selling. Performance reviews that praised my exceptional ability to manage complex operations. Email threads where my solutions had saved hundreds of thousands in costs. Photos from the early days that showed exactly who'd been there when there was nothing but ambition and empty pizza boxes. Sunday morning brought an unexpected ally. Sandra from procurement showed up at 9 with coffee and donuts, looking like she'd aged 5 years in 2 days. The whole company's in chaos, she said, settling into my kitchen like we did this every weekend. Damien's called 4 emergency meetings. Legal's been there around the clock. Someone said they saw Jonathan Wright sleeping in his office. Good, I said, biting into a glazed donut that tasted like vindication.
Is it? Sandra asked.
Marissa, people are scared. If this merger falls through, then maybe Damien should have thought of that before deciding I was expendable. You know it's not just him who'll suffer. I set down my coffee, really looking at Sandra for the first time. She was right, of course. The stock price would tank. People's 401ks would shrivel. The layoffs that were planned might turn into wholesale bloodletting. What would you have me do? I asked. Roll over. Accept their insulting offer and disappear quietly so everyone else can keep their jobs while I lose mine. No, she said quietly. I'd have you fight, but smart, like you always have. She pulled out her phone, showing me a text thread I wasn't supposed to see. The operations team, all of them discussing how to support me. Offering to testify about my contributions. Keisha from HR had even started documenting every initiative I'd led that Damien had claimed. "You're not as invisible as you think," Sandra said. "Not to the people who actually keep this place running." I stared at the messages, throat tight. 20 years of relationships I'd thought were just professional courtesies revealed as something deeper. "There's something else," Sandra continued. "My cousin's a corporate lawyer. She says protective provisions like yours are rare, but when they exist, they're almost impossible to challenge. Damien's scrambling because he knows he can't force you out. So what's his play? Make your life hell until you give in. Death by 1,000 cuts. Suddenly your keycard won't work. Your parking spot will be reassigned. Your direct reports will be told not to communicate with you. Classic constructive dismissal." "Let him try," I said, but we both knew it would be exhausting to fight that kind of petty warfare. Sandra leaned forward. "Or you could make the first move. You've got leverage, but leverage is like milk, it goes bad if you don't use it." After she left, I sat with her words and my documentation and the growing certainty that this was bigger than just my job. This was about every time someone's contribution was erased, every innovative idea credited to someone with a fancier degree, every foundation builder forgotten in favor of the penthouse decorators. The text came at 11:23 Sunday night. Not from Damien, but from his assistant. "Mr. Rusk requests your presence at a breakfast meeting tomorrow, 7:30 a.m. Executive Conference Room. This is not optional." Not optional. As if I was still the girl who fixed coffee makers at dawn. I typed back, "I'll be in my office at 9 a.m. as usual. He's welcome to visit me there." The response was immediate. "Mr. Rusk insists on the executive conference room." Then Mr. Rusk will be disappointed. My phone rang within seconds. Damien himself, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Stop playing games, Marissa." "I'm not playing anything," I said calmly. "I'm establishing boundaries. Something I should have done 20 years ago." "You're destroying this company." "No, I'm exercising my legal rights as a shareholder. If that destroys the company, perhaps you should examine why the company is so fragile." "What do you want?" The question burst out of him, all pretense dropped. "Just tell me what you want." "I want you to see me," I said. "Really see me. Not as the help, not as overhead, not as a problem to be solved. As someone who built this place as much as any programmer or salesperson or executive." "Fine, you're seen, you're valued. Is that what you need to hear?" "No," I said, "because you don't mean it. You're just saying words you think will make me sign your paper." "Then what?" "You want more money, a better title." "What?" I thought about Sandra's advice about leverage and milk and first moves. About 20 years of being underestimated. About the operations team ready to stand behind me if I just showed them how. "I want a seat on the board," I said. Silence. So complete I could hear his breathing. "That's impossible." "No, it's negotiable, just like everything else." "The board seats are already allocated." "Then unallocate one. You're asking me to give up my protective rights. Rights that, as your lawyer has surely explained, are ironclad. That's worth something." "You're not qualified. I've been running operations for a company worth hundreds of millions. I've sat in more board meetings than most of your current directors. I know this company's real vulnerabilities and real strengths. Tell me how I'm not qualified." "This is extortion." "This is negotiation. Something you claim to want." He hung up without another word. I spent the rest of the night not sleeping but planning. If they wanted a war, I'd give them one. But on my terms, fought with weapons they didn't know I possessed. 20 years of institutional knowledge. 20 years of relationships. 20 years of keeping this place running while people like Damien took credit for my work. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling, the kind of weather that made the old building's bones ache. I arrived at 9, exactly finding my keycard, still worked small miracles. The operations team was already gathered in the break room, supposedly for their usual Monday meeting, but really I knew for moral support. "Morning, everyone," I said, pouring coffee from the ancient backup pot someone had dragged out of storage. "Marissa." Tom from facilities said, about the HVAC situation in the server room.
Document everything, I told him. Every issue, every fix, every cost. Email it to yourself and print hard copies. They exchanged glances. You planning something?
I'm planning to ensure operational continuity, I said. Whatever happens with the merger, this company needs to keep functioning. You all know your jobs better than anyone. Make sure there's a record of that knowledge. And if they tell us not to, this from Amy in vendor management. Then you ask for that directive in writing, I said. Always in writing. I'd barely made it to my office when security appeared. 2 guards I'd known for years looking apologetic. Ms. Cole, we've been asked to escort you to the executive conference room.
Asked or ordered?
Please don't make this difficult. I gathered my files, the shareholder agreement prominently on top. Let's go then. Wouldn't want to keep Mr. Rusk waiting any longer than necessary. The walk to the executive floor felt like a perp walk, employees poking their heads out of cubicles to watch. But something interesting happened as I passed. People started standing up. One by one, then, in groups. Not applauding, that would have been too obvious, but standing, bearing witness. By the time we reached the elevator, half the building was on its feet.
What was that about? One of the security guards muttered.
That, I said as the doors closed, was 20 years of respect. Something your CEO might want to think about. The executive conference room was full when I arrived. Not just Damien and his usual lieutenants, but what looked like half the board of directors. Several people in expensive suits I didn't recognize, and enough lawyers to staff a small firm. Thank you for joining us, Damien said, his voice dripping sarcasm. Thank you for the escort, I replied, taking the single chair left for me. Made me feel very valued. Someone cleared their throat. An older man at the head of the table, silver-haired and sharp-eyed. Richard Hartley, the board chairman. I'd met him exactly twice in 20 years. Ms. Cole, he said, we need to resolve this situation quickly and professionally. The merger is in jeopardy because your CEO failed to do basic due diligence, I interrupted. Don't blame me for exercising rights I've held for 2 decades. Nobody's blaming anyone, Hartley said smoothly. We're here to find a solution. Good, I've proposed one. A board seat in exchange for waiving my protective provisions. The room erupted. Lawyers whispering urgently, board members looking appalled. Damien's face cycling through shades of red I didn't know existed in nature. Hartley held up a hand for silence. That's a significant request. It's proportional to what you're asking me to give up. You're asking to be elevated from operations manager to board director overnight, one of the suits said. That's unprecedented. So is trying to erase someone who built your company's infrastructure, I shot back. And I'm not an operations manager. I'm senior vice president of operations. Or was before Mr. Rusk decided I was redundant. Let's take a step back, Hartley said. Ms. Cole, what would you do with a board seat? It was the first real question anyone had asked me. Not what did I want, or what would make me go away, but what would I do? I'd ask the questions nobody else asks, I said. Like why our vendor contracts are structured to favor relationships over cost savings. Why our facilities budget keeps growing while our maintenance quality declines. Why we're pursuing a merger that values growth over stability when our operational foundation is held together with overtime and goodwill. Those are operational concerns, Damien said dismissively. Everything is operational, I replied. Every strategy, every innovation, every grand vision eventually has to be executed by real people in real buildings with real constraints. Ignore operations and you're building castles on sand. Hartley studied me for a long moment. You've given us a lot to think about, Ms. Cole. We'll need to discuss this internally. Of course, I stood. You know where to find me. In my office, keeping things running, like always. I walked out before they could dismiss me past the security guards who'd given up any pretense of escorting me anywhere. The elevator ride down felt like descending from Olympus back to Earth, but Earth was where the real work happened. My phone was already buzzing before I reached my floor. Not from the executives this time, but from the operations team. The quiet revolution had begun,
and they wanted to know what came next. What came next was something Damien Rusk had never prepared for: the discovery that invisible didn't mean powerless. It meant essential. The law office of Nina Ford and Associates occupied the top floor of a converted warehouse in the Arts District, all exposed brick and industrial windows that let in more light than seemed possible. I'd found Nina through Sandra's cousin, who'd described her as the lawyer CEOs have nightmares about. "So you're the woman who's got Damien Rusk calling emergency board meetings at midnight," Nina said, gesturing for me to sit. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 35, with natural hair in a perfect afro and a suit that managed to be both professional and rebellious. "Word travels fast," I said. "In this city, corporate drama travels at light speed." She opened a leather portfolio that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. "I've reviewed the documents you sent. That shareholders' agreement is a thing of beauty. Who was your lawyer back in 2005? Davidson, I think, or Davison. He was working for Equity, insisted on all these provisions Marcus thought were overkill." "Well, thank God for paranoid lawyers working for Equity." Nina pulled out a highlighted copy of the agreement. "This protective provision is bulletproof. They can't force you out, can't dilute your shares, can't proceed with any major transaction without your consent. You've got them in what we call a founder's checkmate." "So why do I feel like I'm losing?" Nina leaned back, studying me. "Because you're fighting their fight on their battlefield. Boardrooms, corporate hierarchy, proper channels. That's their world. You need to flip the script." "How?" "First, tell me what you really want. Not what you asked for in that meeting, but what you actually want." I thought about it, really thought about it for the first time since this started. "I want them to admit they need me. Not publicly necessarily, but genuinely. I want the people who actually do the work to be valued as much as the people who talk about the work. And I want to walk away on my own terms, not thrown out like garbage after 20 years. "Okay, now we're getting somewhere." Nina started sketching on a legal pad. The board seat was a good opening gambit. It scared them. But it's not what you really want. It's leverage for what you really want. Which is a consulting contract that reflects your true value. Not the insulting 6 months they offered, but something real. 2 years minimum strategic advisor role, direct reporting to the board, not Damien. Plus a compensation package that includes not just hourly rates, but success metrics tied to operational efficiency. They'll never agree to that. They will if the alternative is worse. Nina smiled, and I understood why CEOs had nightmares about her. See, right now, they're treating this like a hostage negotiation. You have something they want, they're trying to pay the minimum ransom. But what if we change the narrative? To what? A shareholder activism campaign. You're not a disgruntled employee. You're a concerned shareholder protecting the interests of all stakeholders from a rushed merger that undervalues operational excellence. My phone buzzed. A text from Keisha in HR. "Emergency all hands at 3 p.m., merger update." Nina saw my expression. "What is it?" "Damien's calling an all-hands meeting, probably to paint me as the villain holding up everyone's payday." "Perfect," Nina said. "Let him. Every move he makes in public weakens his position. Has he announced the merger publicly yet?" Press release went out the day of the first all-hands meeting. But no SEC filings yet. I shook my head. Then he's in a bind. He's announced a deal he can't close without you. Every day that passes, more questions will arise. Apex will get nervous. The board will panic. Stock price will wobble. She slid a document across the desk. "This is a draft letter to the board of directors. Not threatening, just outlining your concerns as a long-term shareholder about the merger's impact on operational stability." I read it through. It was brilliant, professional, reasonable, and absolutely terrifying to anyone who understood corporate liability. "This will start a war," I said. "The war already started when they tried to disappear you. This just makes it public." My phone rang. Patricia from HR. "I should take this," I said. "Speakerphone," Nina instructed. "I want to hear their tone." "Marissa." Patricia's voice was strained.
I wanted to give you a heads up. The all-hands meeting this afternoon. Let me guess. Damien's going to explain how one selfish person is blocking everyone's financial future. He's going to offer context about the merger process. But Marissa I'm calling because, well, he's also planning to announce your replacement. Bradley Morrison will be taking over operations immediately. I felt the words like a physical blow. Nina held up a hand reminding me to stay calm. I see, I managed. And what about my current status? You're on administrative leave pending resolution of the shareholder issue. Administrative leave. That's a nice euphemism for locked out. Your keycard will remain active, but you'll need to coordinate with security for building access. Of course. Thank you for the heads up, Patricia. I hung up and looked at Nina. Still think I'm winning. I think Damien just made a critical mistake, she said, already typing on her laptop. He's constructively terminating you while simultaneously needing your consent for his biggest deal. That's not just bad strategy, it's potentially actionable. I don't want to sue. You won't have to. The threat will be enough. She spun her laptop around, showing an email draft. We're going to send this to the board, copying Apex's legal team. Very simple. You're concerned about operational continuity during the merger transition, especially given the sudden removal of 20-year operational leadership. You're requesting an emergency board meeting to discuss. They'll refuse. Maybe, but Apex won't like seeing this kind of instability right before closing a $150 million deal. They'll start asking uncomfortable questions. I thought about the operations team, about Sandra's support, about standing ovations in cubicle farms. What about my people? If this gets ugly, they could suffer. They're already suffering. Damien's about to put a McKinsey consultant in charge of operations. How do you think that ends for them? She was right. Bradley Morrison's operational experience consisted of PowerPoint decks and cost-cutting recommendations. He'd gut my team within 6 months, all in the name of efficiency. Send it, I said. Nina hit send with a satisfied smile. Now we wait. Want to bet how long before? Her phone rang, then mine, then the office line. 30 seconds, Nina said, impressed. That might be a record. I looked at my phone. 17 missed calls in the time it took Nina to answer hers. Nina Ford speaking. Yes, I represent Ms. Cole. No, she won't be withdrawing the letter. A meeting, let me check my calendar. She winked at me. I have an opening Thursday at 2. No, nothing sooner. My client's rights aren't subject to your timeline. Good day. She hung up and immediately forwarded her calls to voicemail. Thursday gives them 3 days to stew. 3 days for Apex to get nervous. 3 days for the stock price to reflect uncertainty. What do I do until then? Document everything. Every contribution you've made, every system you've implemented, every crisis you've solved. We're going to make it crystal clear that removing you isn't just cruel, it's corporate malpractice. I stood to leave, then turned back. Why are you helping me? This can't be your usual kind of case. Nina smiled. My mother worked factory floors for 30 years. Never missed a day, trained every new hire, knew every machine. When the company sold, they gave her a plastic plaque and 2 weeks' notice. She died thinking she never mattered. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be victorious. Show them what happens when they try to erase someone who matters. I left her office feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. Not for keeping my job, that ship had sailed, but for something better. For proving that the invisible work, the unglamorous work, the foundation work, was what really kept companies alive. The drive back to Northwell took me past the old building on Maple Street. Still there, still housing dreamers above restaurants, still leaking when it rained. I pulled over and took a photo, remembering the girl who'd fixed everything with duct tape and determination. That girl had protected herself with legal provisions. She barely understood insurance against a future she couldn't imagine. Time to cash in that policy. My phone buzzed. A text from Tom in facilities. Heard about the leave. We're documenting everything like you said. Also, the coffee maker broke again. Nobody knows how to fix it. I smiled. Let Bradley Morrison figure out why the 3rd floor ran hot, and the loading dock stuck, and the coffee maker had moods like a temperamental artist.
Let him discover what 20 years of institutional knowledge looked like when it walked out the door. The all-hands meeting was in 3 hours. Damien would paint me as the villain, the selfish ex-employee holding progress hostage. The stock options would be dangled, the merger benefits emphasized the collective good invoked against individual greed. But Nina was right. This wasn't my battlefield. Let Damien have his corporate theater. I had something better: a lawyer who scared CEOs, a team documenting 20 years of invisible excellence and protective provisions, drafted by a paranoid lawyer who'd insisted on insurance just in case. Just in case had arrived. The war wasn't over. But for the first time since Damien Rusk had dismissed me as someone who fixed coffee makers, I knew I could win. Not just for me. For every invisible worker who'd ever been erased from their own story. The coffee maker at Northwell would stay broken. But something bigger was about to be fixed. The call came at 6:27 a.m. on Wednesday, jerking me from the first decent sleep I'd had in a week. Not from Northwell, from an unfamiliar New York number that my half-awake brain almost declined. Something made me answer. "Ms. Cole, this is Robert Chen from Apex Digital Holdings." I sat up instantly alert. The acquiring company had entered the game. "I apologize for the early hour, but I'm about to board a flight to Columbus. I was hoping we could meet today. Privately." "Does Damien know you're calling?" A pause. Mr. Rusk's awareness isn't relevant to my fiduciary duty to Apex shareholders. Corporate speak for no. Interesting. "Where and when?" I asked. "The Metropolitan Club, 1 p.m. I'll have you added to the guest list." The Metropolitan Club was old Columbus money, the kind of place where deals that shaped the city happened over cigars and brandy. I delivered documents there once 20 years ago, too intimidated to do more than hand them to the concierge. Nina answered on the first ring when I called, despite the early hour. "Apex is breaking ranks. This is good. Wear your best suit, and remember you're not asking for anything. You're explaining why their deal is about to explode." The morning crawled by. I pressed my one good suit, charcoal gray, bought for Marcus's funeral 5 years ago, and tried not to overthink what this meeting meant. At 12:30, I drove downtown, valeting my Honda between Mercedes and Teslas, trying to look like I belonged. Robert Chen wasn't what I expected. Young, maybe early 30s, with the kind of casual precision that came from never having to try too hard. We sat in a private dining room that whispered old money from every surface. "Thank you for coming," he said after we'd ordered him the salmon, me the club salad I was too nervous to eat. "I'll be direct. We have a problem." "You have a problem," I corrected. "I have leverage." He smiled slightly. "Fair enough. Let me rephrase. Apex has invested considerable resources in this acquisition based on certain assumptions. One of those assumptions was that Northwell's operational infrastructure was stable and transferable. And now I discover that infrastructure is largely dependent on one person who's been placed on administrative leave and holds blocking rights on our deal. Damien told you I was replaceable. Mr. Rusk told us many things. The due diligence tells a different story." He pulled out a tablet. Swiping through documents I recognized. My process improvements, cost savings analyses, vendor relationships mapped over 2 decades. "You saved Northwell approximately $37 million over your tenure through operational efficiencies alone. How did you?" "Your team has been very helpful. Apparently, they're concerned about continuity of operations under new leadership." His tone suggested he knew exactly who'd orchestrated that helpful documentation. "Ms. Cole, I need to understand something. Is your opposition to this merger philosophical or practical? What's the difference?" "Philosophical opposition means you'll never approve regardless of terms. Practical opposition means there's a deal to be made." I set down my fork, meeting his eyes. 3 days ago, I would have signed anything to keep my job. But Damien didn't just want me gone, he wanted me erased. Like I never existed, never contributed, never mattered. That's not practical. That's personal. And if we made it impersonal, if Apex recognized your contributions where Northwell leadership hasn't. How? He leaned forward. What if you worked for us instead of them? The room suddenly felt smaller. Explain.
Apex needs someone who understands operational integration at a granular level. Someone who's actually built systems, not just analyzed them. A senior vice president of integration services reporting directly to our board, not Northwell's management.
You're offering to hire me away from the company you're acquiring.
I'm offering to recognize talent that's being wasted. 3-year contract base salary of $300,000, performance bonuses tied to successful integration metrics, full benefits, and a signing bonus that reflects your importance to this deal.
How much of a signing bonus? $500,000. I nearly choked on my water.
That's less than we'll lose if this deal falls apart. Ms. Cole, Apex has acquisition targets lined up behind Northwell. If this fails because of preventable operational ignorance, heads will roll, starting with mine.
What about my protective provisions?
You'd waive them as part of accepting our offer. The merger proceeds, you transition to Apex, everyone wins. Everyone except the operations team I've built. Bring them with you. We'll need experienced people who understand how things actually work versus how they look on paper. I sat back processing. It was elegant I'd get recognition compensation and the ability to protect my people. Damien would get his merger but lose his scapegoat. The board would celebrate while knowing they'd mishandled everything.
I need to think about it, I said.
Of course, but Ms. Cole, think quickly. Every day this drags on costs both companies money and credibility.
There's a board meeting tomorrow, I said. My lawyer will be there.
I know. I'll be there too. He signaled for the check. Apex doesn't typically get involved in target company personnel issues. But we also don't typically find operational linchpins disguised as coffee machine repairers. I did fix the coffee machine, I said, multiple times. I know. Mr. Morrison has been trying to fix it for 3 days. Apparently it requires what your facilities manager called Marissa magic. We stood to leave. At the door, he turned back. One more thing. That shareholders agreement from 2005, we've seen dozens of companies wish they had that kind of protection. Your lawyer back then, Davidson, he's now senior partner at one of Silicon Valley's top firms, still talks about the company that actually listened to his protective provision recommendations. The drive back blurred past while my mind raced. 300,000 base, 500,000 signing. My team protected. 3 years to prove operational excellence mattered as much as financial engineering. Nina picked up before the first ring finished. Tell me everything. I did, sitting in my car in my driveway watching neighbors who had no idea their boring suburban street housed corporate warfare. It's a good offer, Nina said when I finished. Better than anything we could have forced through litigation. But nothing. They're recognizing your value, protecting your people, and giving you a platform to implement your vision. Take it. What about justice, making them admit what they did? Justice is you walking into that board meeting tomorrow with a better offer than they ever made. Justice is Bradley Morrison calling you for advice when their operations fall apart. Justice is Damian Rusk realizing he gift-wrapped his best asset for a competitor. She was right, but something still nagged at me. What is it? Nina asked, reading my silence. For 20 years I've fixed things at Northwell. Every broken system, every process failure, every crisis. What if I'm not ready to stop? Marissa. Nina's voice softened. You're not stopping. You're graduating. From fixing their problems to building your solutions. From invisible to essential. From begging for recognition to being courted for your expertise. I sat with that for a moment, engine off suburban life flowing around me. Set the meeting, I said finally. But I want something in writing from Apex first. The offer, the team protection, all of it. Already drafting the term sheet. Marissa, congratulations. You just won a war most people don't even know how to fight. I went inside, poured a glass of the good wine, and opened my laptop. 17 emails from my operations team, all variations of the same theme. Bradley Morrison had asked for process documentation, and none of them could locate it. Tom had even sent a photo of the still broken coffee machine with the caption, "Awaiting Marissa magic." Tomorrow, I'd walk into that boardroom one last time. not as the invisible woman begging for scraps, but as someone with options. Someone whose expertise was worth more than Northwell's entire C-suite had ever imagined. The girl who'd started with nothing but determination above a Vietnamese restaurant was about to show them all what 20 years of fixing things really meant. It meant you understood what was broken. And more importantly, you knew exactly how to fix it. The coffee maker at Northwell would stay broken a little while longer. But my future. That was finally after 20 years in perfect working order. The boardroom at 2 p.m. Thursday looked like a corporate tribunal. The full board of directors lined one side of the massive oak table, their faces ranging from curious to hostile. Damien sat at the head, Bradley Morrison at his right hand, like an eager lieutenant. The Apex team occupied the other side, Robert Chen and three others in identical black suits, their expressions unreadable. Nina and I took the only remaining seats at the far end like defendants awaiting judgment. Richard Hartley cleared his throat. "Thank you all for attending this emergency session. Ms. Cole, I believe you requested this meeting. My client has concerns about operational continuity during the proposed merger," Nina said smoothly. "Concerns that have only deepened since her arbitrary placement on administrative leave." "There's nothing arbitrary about restructuring redundant positions," Damien interjected. Redundant. I spoke for the first time, letting 20 years of suppressed frustration color the word. Is that what you call the person who saved this company $37 million? That's an unsubstantiated claim. Robert Chen's tablet slid across the table, stopping in front of Damien. "Actually, it's conservative. Our analysis shows Ms. Cole's operational improvements saved closer to $42 million over her tenure. Page 17 if you're interested." Damien's face darkened as he scrolled through the document. The board members leaned in suddenly, very interested in what Apex had discovered. "Furthermore," Chen continued, "our integration team has identified critical operational dependencies that weren't disclosed during due diligence. Vendor relationships maintained solely through Ms. Cole's personal contacts. System workarounds that exist only in her institutional knowledge. Process improvements never formally documented because apparently no one thought to ask. We have a new COO," Damien started, "who can't fix a coffee machine, much less manage relationships with 17 key vendors," I said quietly. "But don't worry, I'm sure he'll figure it out. Eventually. After how many millions in lost efficiency?" "What do you want?" Hartley asked, cutting through the posturing. Nina slid our proposal across the table. Ms. Cole is prepared to waive her protective provisions and support the merger under certain conditions. The room held its breath as Hartley read. His eyebrows climbed steadily higher. A board observer seat for 2 years, consulting agreement at $1,000 per hour for transition services, severance package of $1.5 million, and guaranteed positions for her entire operations team. "That's extortion," Damien exploded. "That's recognition," Nina corrected, "of what Ms. Cole is actually worth to this merger's success." Or Robert Chen spoke up, she could accept Apex's offer instead. The room froze. Damien turned to Chen slowly like a turret tracking a target. "What offer?" Chen smiled pleasantly. "Senior Vice President of Integration Services. Significant compensation package. Her team transitions with her. Effective immediately upon merger close." I watched Damien's face cycle through emotions as he processed what this meant. His scapegoat was being recruited by the acquiring company. His narrative of operational redundancy was crumbling in real time. "You can't, that's interference with—" "With what?" Chen asked mildly. "Recruiting talent, recognizing value where Northwell leadership hasn't. That's not interference, Mr. Rusk. That's business." "Marissa," Hartley's voice cut through the tension. "Is this what you want, to leave Northwell after 20 years? I looked around the room, at the executives who'd never seen me until I became a problem, at the board members who'd signed off on my erasure without a second thought, at Damien, who even now couldn't hide his contempt. What I wanted was to matter, I said. To have 20 years of keeping this place running mean something. To not be thrown away like a broken coffee maker when someone newer and shinier came along. You matter,
Patricia from HR said quietly. You've always mattered.
Just not enough to keep my job, or my dignity, or even my access card without security escort.
Silence settled over the room like dust. But that's the past, I continued. The future is a company that values operational excellence enough to pay for it. That sees infrastructure as an asset, not overhead. That recognizes the people who actually make things work. I stood up, Nina rising with me. So here's my offer. One time only expiring when I walk out that door. I waive my protective provisions. The merger proceeds. In exchange, Northwell pays me 2 years severance at my current rate, continues my benefits through the transition, and provides strong recommendations for my ongoing work with Apex. That's all? Damien asked suspiciously. No. You also guarantee positions for any operations team members who want them either at Northwell or Apex. They built this infrastructure as much as I did. They deserve protection.
And if we refuse? I smiled the same smile I'd worn fixing coffee machines and contracts and crises for 20 years. Then I remain a shareholder with protective provisions. The merger stalls. Apex walks away. The stock tanks. And everyone in this room explains to their investors how they let ego override $37 million in operational savings. Hartley looked between Damien and Chen. Gentlemen, I think we need a brief recess to discuss. No recess, Chen interrupted. Apex accepts Ms. Cole's terms. We'll honor the severance and benefits through the transition guarantee positions for her team and look forward to her leadership in integration services. You can't just, Damien started. Actually, we can, Chen said. Page 43 of the merger agreement. Apex has full authority over personnel decisions post-close. We're simply exercising that authority early. Nina pushed a single page across the table. Waiver of protective provisions. Contingent on written confirmation of the terms Ms. Cole outlined. The room erupted in whispered conferences. Lawyers huddling with board members, Damien gesticulating angrily at Bradley Chen typing calmly on his phone. Finally, Hartley raised a hand for silence. The board accepts these terms. Legal will draft the necessary documents within the hour. Nina has already drafted them, I said. All they need are signatures. 20 minutes later, papers signed and copies distributed, I stood to leave for the last time. Marissa, Damien called out. Was it worth it? Destroying relationships, threatening the company, all for what money? I turned back, looking at him with something almost like pity. You still don't understand. This was never just about money. It was about being recognized. About 20 years of effort being valued. About making sure the next person like me knows their worth before someone like you tries to make them believe otherwise. I paused at the door, looking back at the boardroom where I'd never been welcome until I'd forced my way in. Oh, and Damien, the coffee maker in the break room, the heating element needs to be realigned, the water pressure adjusted to 4.2 bars, and the gasket replaced every 3 months. But the real secret, I smiled. You have to actually care about the people drinking the coffee. That's what makes it work. I walked out, Nina beside me, leaving behind 20 years of being invisible. 3 months later, I stood in Apex's integration center, watching my old operations team implement new systems with the precision of Swiss watches. Tom had fixed their coffee maker on day 1. Sandra was revolutionizing vendor management. Even Keisha from HR had made the jump, building cultural bridges between the companies. Robert Chen stopped by my office, a real office with windows and everything. Northwell's stock dropped 12% last quarter, he mentioned casually. Operational inefficiencies, vendor disputes, some kind of HVAC crisis that took 2 weeks to resolve. Imagine that, I said. Bradley Morrison submitted his resignation yesterday. Apparently, he prefers strategy to implementation. Imagine that too. Chen smiled. That shareholders' agreement you had. We're implementing similar protections for all key operational staff going forward. Can't afford to lose irreplaceable people because someone doesn't recognize their value. Good policy, I agreed. He left and I turned back to my windows, looking out at a city where I'd spent 20 years being invisible. Now I had business cards with a title that matched my worth a team that was valued, and the satisfaction of knowing that somewhere across town, Damian Rusk was learning what happened when you dismissed the person who kept the lights on. The coffee maker hummed contentedly in the break room, fixed properly by people who understood that the best solutions came from caring about the problems. And me, I was finally, after 20 years, exactly where I belonged. Not invisible, not erased, not forgotten. Essential. The merger went through, of course. $150 million changing hands while I changed organizations. But the real transaction was simpler, the recognition that the people who fix things, who build foundations, who show up every day to make sure everything works, were not overhead. We're the reason anything works at all. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and have a 20-year-old shareholders agreement in a filing cabinet, you get to prove it. You called my 50,000 shares worthless, Mr. Rusk. But they were worth exactly what they needed to be enough to show everyone what I was really worth. Not bad for a girl who started out fixing coffee makers above a Vietnamese restaurant. Not bad at all. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to hear where you're enjoying this tale from. Drop a comment below, and let's connect and share our thoughts about workplace recognition and standing up for your worth. If you found this story meaningful, please subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. And don't forget to press that hype button to help more people discover this story of invisible workers finally being seen. Until next time, remember, your value doesn't decrease based on someone's inability to see your worth.